think you just can't be in cash because all these governments are just printing too much money. The inflation problem is worldwide, and it's because all these central banks made the same mistake. And unfortunately, they were pretty much following the Fed's lead. We're the issuer of the reserve currency, and so everybody else kind of, marches to the beat of our drum. And we had interest rates at 1% or 0, and so everybody else had to come down. In fact, some countries went negative because they wanted their rates to be lower than ours. Well, when our rates are 0, how do you get below 0? So they actually went into uncharted territory in the twilight zone of negative rates, as irrational as that is. But that was only because we were at 0. That's why they had to go negative. They wanted to have easy money in relation to a U.S. Well, the U.S., we went to 0. So we kind of corrupted the monetary policy of the entire world. But I think the world is going to reject the dollar. It's already happening. I mean, in fact, with the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia and the example that we've sent to the world, I already think, the Chinese and a lot of other players are just not liking that and really wanting to take away some of America's power. And the source of that power is the reserve status of the dollar. And we lose that, and it's a whole new ballgame here. Because America's ability to live beyond its means is a function of the dollar's reserve status, because we can print dollars and use those dollars that we print to buy goods and services, mainly goods that we didn't produce. It's kind of like these guys that issue cryptocurrencies out of thin air, right? That FTX token cost Bankman-Fried nothing to create, and he could just issuing them and have this huge value. Well, we do the same thing with the dollar. It cost us nothing. We create them out of thin air, and then everybody assigns a value to them. We've always been trusting third parties, and it's worked. The only time it doesn't work is when the third party is a government. That's when they screwed us, because when we trusted the government, like when we trusted the United States government, because the government had the gold, and they said, hey, here's our notes, they're backed by gold. What did Nixon do? Nixon devalued twice, although Roosevelt devalued first. He took the gold, the dollar, and said, hey, it was worth, gold was at $20 an ounce, and now it's 35. So now you need $35 to buy an ounce of gold. Before you needed 20. But then Nixon says, well, he devalued it from 35 to like 40 and then 42. But then he said, you know what? I'm defaulting. We're not giving you any gold for your paper. So the US government screwed everybody. I don't know if they're thinking about the world returning to a gold standard. I think what they are concerned about is the backing behind their own currency. And they recognize that dollars are going to lose a lot of value based on the enormity of US government deficits and the size of our debt and the fact that we just can't possibly service the debt, let alone repay the debt. You also have the baby boom generation, of which I'm a part of. We're in retirement, and more of us are entering retirement, and it's a huge generation. I mean, I'm at the tail end of the baby boom. I'm about to turn 60, but there's a lot of people that are just around my age or are now already 65 and they're retiring, and Social Security is broke. And so it's already spending more than it's collecting, especially with the labor force participation rate so low. And so this massive deficits have to be funded, these unfunded liabilities. And central banks realize that the dollar is going to lose a lot of value. Treasuries are going to lose a lot of value. So they're holding all these dollars, all these treasuries. So they want to get rid of them. But what do they want to buy? I mean, they got to buy something. They're not going to just spend it. So they're buying gold. I mean, gold's a better asset. I suppose they could sell their dollars and buy euros, or they could buy yen. But you got problems in Europe. You got problems in Japan. Gold is a monetary asset that's nobody else's liability, and you don't have to worry about a country overprinting gold, because they can't print gold. It has to be mined, and the production of gold is slow. Maybe the supply will increase 1.5% next year. The supply of fiat currencies will grow at a minimum 5 to 10%, maybe more, depending on the currency. So there's massive inflation in the fiat world. You don't have that with real money. So central banks are doing this. Russia had reserves in dollars that got frozen, but their reserves in gold, they still have those. Yeah. And so the message that we sent to the world is that your reserves had better be in gold, because that's the only way to keep them safe. Because if they're in dollars, well, we tell you what you could do with those reserves. And if you do something we don't like, you're not going to have those reserves. That doesn't inspire a lot of confidence in people. No. Why would you want to hold your reserves in a currency where the United States could just yank it away from you? Like if you do something America doesn't like, they're in a position to punish you. Well, I wouldn't want to be in that position, especially if I know America doesn't like me, right? Like China, right? Everybody wants to bash China. They've got trillions of dollars over there. You know, they've loaned us all this money. And so I would think, shit, we want to get rid of this. And I think that's what they're doing. They're just divesting themselves of dollars. And what that means is our ability to export our inflation to China is coming to an end, because that's what we did for years. The Chinese sent us goods and we sent them paper. And they took that paper and they bought our bonds. And it was a win for us because we got cheap prices and low interest rates. But you know we're going to lose that ability. And that's a big change for the United States. It means a much lower standard of living for Americans. I think the world was going to move away from the dollar as a reserve anyway. It was inevitable. But I think that action certainly sped up the process. So it will happen sooner as a result of that action than it would have happened anyway. But it was inevitable that it was going to happen. In fact, it should have already happened. It's long overdue. There's no question that gold is going to reemerge as the monetary unit of choice for the world. I mean, it's not an accident that gold was money for 5,000 years. It's been money for so long because it works. But governments, didn't like the gold standard because if they wanted to spend money, they needed the gold. And so they needed to collect it through taxes because they didn't have gold. The private sector had gold. And so if the government wanted gold to pay for some spending program, they had to take it from the people. Well, as much as the people like government programs, they also hate paying taxes. And so governments wanted a way to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted to give people government programs, but not give them the bill. Now, one way is like, well, we're going to tax the rich, right? Don't worry about it. We're going to give you all these goodies, but the rich people are going to pay for it, right? Well, eventually, you've taxed the rich to the point that you can't tax them any higher. And now you have just the middle class left, and there, they don't want to pay more taxes. So they just print money. We run these huge deficits and we pay for government with inflation. And that's why we have so much inflation, because we have so much government that we didn't pay for through taxation. So we're paying for it through inflation, which means higher prices. So I think that the free market is going to reject the dollar and other currencies because they're a flawed form of money, because they are no longer a store of value, right? They can still function as a medium of exchange. You can still use them as a unit of account, but if they're not a good store of value, then they're not good as a medium of deferred payment. They're not good for lending and borrowing, because you really have no idea. If I loan you my dollars for 10 years, I mean, in a high inflation environment, I have no idea what those dollars might buy me in 10 years. They may buy me nothing.